Hi, this is Zach with Intro to Computing. Today we're going to be working on a demonstration on how to make animal hybrids. We're going to be introducing some new concepts using layers, layer masks, and then also adjustment layers. So a lot of new tools that we can add to our tool sets. So the first thing that we want to do to get started is to find our images to work from. And I'm going to go to Google. I already downloaded a few images, but I want to show you sort of the best ways to work this out. So for instance, whenever we're working with something like this, we need to make sure that the images that we use are legal and we're able to use them. They're large enough as well. If you look in the lower left hand corner of each of these images here, it'll show pixel dimensions. 480 by 300 is very tiny. Then this one that's 5000 by 4000 is quite large. Generally the rule in Photoshop is the larger pixel dimensions that you're working with, the better. That just means that your picture is higher quality and it'll have kind of a better effect. If you're working with a small image like this, then you don't really have much room to work with. It's going to be very tiny and then you won't even be able to print it out. So, a few ways to find large images. You can filter it out by using Google. We're in the images section here. And I don't know if you've ever used these, but over here there's a button where you click on Tools and then you have a few options to work with. Number one, we're going to be looking at like the usage rights part. If you click on non-commercial reuse with modification, that means that every image that comes up now you are able to use, just as long as you're not making t-shirts out of it or you're not making any money off it. And then you can find your pictures from there. Here's a good one. If I wanted to download this piece, I could even just right click on it here and then go click on Save Image As and save it into my folder. I would like that picture actually. And if you wanted something like this, right click, Save As, and then put it in the folder. Basically, you could just get as many images that you need, then you can pick from it later. Now, here's something that came up that is not good. That's 300 pixels by 300 pixels, basically. Our size is not set yet, so what we want to do is click on the size part here, and I'm going to click on large. If I click on large, then that means that every picture that comes up now will be of a good size to use. And if you want to get even more specific, you can go to larger than, and you can work your way up all the way to 70 megapixels, which is incredibly big. I don't even know if we'll be able to find a horse that size. Yeah, these are just like prints. But if I were to be in like the 2 megapixel range, then that's fine. That's a good one too. Okay, so I have a few pictures saved. I also got some gorilla pictures that I wanted to use. Now it's time to start putting these together. I'm going to open up Photoshop. I'm going to go to File, Open, and then I'm going to open up the pictures I want to use. So I saved a few. This one here is bad because if you can see where it says dimensions, it's 529 by 300. I'm just going to delete it. Okay, so I have these choices. I think I want to use this gorilla head. I'm trying to think which one of these it would look better on. Probably this horse. So I'm going to double click on this. I'm going to open up that horse. I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to get the gorilla. Okay, so one thing to look at up here where it says 25%, this one says 33%. These two tabs I can kind of switch in between. The more photos that you open up in Photoshop, it'll just come up to this little tab part. Now with this, I was talking about the numbers. That just means that that's the scale that it's at right now. If I zoom in, this is what the actual picture is at 100%. So that's a pretty high quality photo. Same thing with this one. This is the 100% version of what this photo is. So these will be kind of nice to use. Now, first way, how do I bring a picture onto another picture? This can be kind of easy, where all you have to do is make a selection and copy it and then paste it over. We've used the selection tool in the past where you can use a rectangle marquee and just select the thing that you want. I usually like to just hit Control A to select all. You can even use your drop down menu here to go to select all. And then we're going to copy this and then we're going to paste it into the other horse image. So you can hit Command C to copy or Control C to copy, or you can go up to Edit and Copy. Now I'm switching my horse tab and I'm going to paste this, so I can hit Command V, Control V, or I can go up to Edit and Paste. And you may notice that my image is, pretty large. If I go look over at my layers tab, I have 2 layers that are working for me right now. Anytime that you paste something, it'll make it an entirely new layer. So I'm going to take my move tool. It's at the very top part of your menu. You can kind of move this around. I'm just kind of getting an idea of, I'm going to definitely scale this gorilla down. But before I do any of that, I want to make a couple duplicates of these layers. And the reason for that is I'm practicing non-destructive editing, so if I make any edits, then I can always go back and have my original. So I'm going to right click and make a duplicate layer of each one of these. And once I've done that, I'm going to just hide one of each of those layers. And I'm going to keep those at the bottom. I'm just going to make these, I'm going to double click, I'm going to unlock this first. You can just click the padlock. If I double click where it says layer 0, this is where I have the option to rename. I'm just going to call this untouched horse. And this will be my untouched gorilla. This just means that they're my pristine copies. If I ever make any mistakes, edits with these top ones, then I will always have the originals. Okay, next part that I want to do is I want to mask some things out with my gorilla. Like, I can't necessarily work my hybrid or make it work well if I have all this stuff around the outside. So I'm going to make a layer mask. And before I do that, I want to scale this down just a little bit so I can get it all on the screen. And the way that we scale it is by going up to Edit, Transform, and Scale. These transform tools we're going to be using quite a bit. It'll just become second nature whenever we start using them. You can rotate, skew, distort, all of that. Scale you use all the time though. So Edit, Transform, Scale. I'm going to click on this, and then you'll have some bounding boxes. If you're in the new version of Photoshop, like the newest update, if you just click and drag, it'll keep it relative scale. If you're in the old version of Photoshop, if you click and drag it without touching anything, it'll be kind of out of its relative scale. So if you're in the older version, one thing that you do is you hold the Shift button on your keyboard, and then whenever you scale it down, it will scale it down relative scale. So please just make sure that you're doing that nicely. So I'm going to scale this down maybe a little bit more. That's looking like it could be about a good scale with this. Maybe just a little bit more. And now I want to accept these changes that I've just done. I can do this a couple different ways. One, I can double click in the middle of this, or two, I can click on the check mark up here. This can also cancel your selection or cancel whatever changes that you're doing. But this one's good. I'm going to click accept, and now I have this at this scale. The next thing I want to do is work on a layer mask. The layer mask basically just goes on top or side by side with a layer, and then I can use my paintbrush to edit things out that I don't want, and then I can also keep things that I do want. So it's easier to just show you. You have a layer mask button over here in your layer menu. It looks like a rectangle with a circle on it. I am going to make sure that I'm selected on my gorilla layer, and then I'm going to click on that layer mask button. Now once I do that, there is a rectangle that appears right next to my gorilla part of my layer, and this just means that this is the mask that I'm using. You can click in between both of these and you can affect one or the other. If we're working on the layer mask though, we need to be clicked on this, the right side of this. So just make sure that you're on that. You can tell by the little white bounding box. Okay, next part. The magic of this is using your paintbrush tool. The paintbrush works in a way where you take out parts that you don't want, and then you can put back parts again that you may have accidentally gotten rid of. So the important thing is to make sure that you are using black and white. Here is a nice little default button. If you click on that, it'll make your colors default black and white. There's a double-sided arrow over here where you can switch back and forth between the foreground and background color. There's also a handy key on your keyboard that will switch between them, and that's the X button. And as you're working on a layer mask, it'll become probably more natural for you to click the X button rather than clicking the arrows back and forth. It'll be better for your workflow. Okay, next part is we want to adjust the way our brush is. In order to do that, you go in the upper left, and if you click the down arrow, you have a lot of different options here. I think by default, you see your folders are kind of like this. If you click this down arrow, then you can have some of these basic options. These are your most basic brushes to use. I would recommend for a mask like this using a soft round. Now if I click on the hard round, the only thing it really changes is the hardness of it. The brush has two different kind of parts of it that at its most basic level, just the size and the hardness. If it's set to a 0 hardness, if I start using my paintbrush on my layer mask, it has a fuzzy edge. If I go back over here and bring my hardness up to 100%, then it is like literally poking holes through here. So for something like this, I'm going to want to keep this on a nice kind of 0% hardness, at least for now. And you may have noticed, like, wow, look at that, I ruined my picture. This is kind of the nice part of using a layer mask. I've been using the black color, that'll get rid of things. But if I swap back to white, I can bring that back in. I can bring those parts back in. So what I'm going to be doing is swapping back to black, and then I'm just going to go through here and paint these parts out that I don't want. I'm not going to get real close to the face right now because my brush is so soft. I don't want to have to like go in there and have to make a bunch of new mistakes or fix a bunch of mistakes should say. Okay, so I'm getting this part figured out. I'm going to zoom in because I want to get more detailed with this. And here's a time where I can get a little bit more specific with my brush. Let's say I actually do go in there and take away a little bit of that. I can go in the opposite way with my brush and kind of bring some of that back. So I'm going to go up to my brush settings, and I'm going to bring the hardness up some. I'm going to bring the scale down some. Also, a quick hotkey to get to your brush settings is just right-clicking on your screen, and it'll take you there. Maybe I'll bring down the hardness a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to swap to my white, and I'm going to bring this back in. Not really sure what that thing in its mouth is, but I might, if I were working on this image, I might edit that part out by using like clone stamp or something. Okay. Might change my hardness to be a little bit softer. I'm going to use my X button to swap that part out. Getting that little dark edge here in the nose. And then this is just something where you can be as tedious as you want with it. Obviously, the more time you spend on it, the better, but time is of the essence, and I want to kind of get to these other parts. So I'm just going to make a quick kind of version of this. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. Okay, so that's my first mask. I'm back on the move tool over here. If I click and drag it, see those little parts? I need to get rid of those. One way that I can see them better is if I unhide this horse layer, and then I can kind of see those a little better. So I'm going to make sure I'm clicked on my mask, and I'm going to get rid of those. Okay, now I think we are good. I'm going to bring my horse back in by clicking on the eyeball. And I'm on my move tool, and then I'm going to bring this over here. Looks like there's still a couple of spots, so I'm going to get rid of those. Okay, now I think that's fine. Now maybe the next thing I want to do, I don't know how I want to have this kind of attach on here, if it should be kind of straight up like that, or if I should angle it. Let me try angling it. So I can go up to Edit, Transform, and Rotate. If I do this, I can kind of get a better angle at it. Yeah, okay, that works a lot better. Perfect. And now I'm going to select those changes by clicking the check mark. That's fine. You'll notice that this is a really, not a very good transition. It's very hard from here to here. I'll fix that in a minute, but I think the most glaring issue right now is this horse head that's behind here. I need to fix this part and get rid of it. I can do this kind of the way that we did with our exercises, getting rid of the human things in the environment. So one thing that I want to work on is just getting rid of this. I'm going to do something quickly. I'm going to hit the eyeball here to hide my gorilla head, and then I'm going to just use my clone stamp and try to get some foliage back there. Here's my clone stamp. I'm going to do something a little bit tricky. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call this like my patch layer. If I double click on that layer name, I can rename it. I'm calling this my patch layer because it'll work as a patch where it's going to be on its own separate thing. I'm going to clone stamp some parts, and those clone stamp parts are only going to be on that layer. While I'm at it, I'm going to rename this as well. I'm going to call this my horse. And here's my gorilla layer. Okay, so with the patch, this is an important part where I'm going to go up to my clone stamp settings. I'm going to make this larger so I can make some big broad strokes. I want to make sure that my hardness is low because I want it to be soft looking. And this is the most important part here, where it says sample. The way that your clone stamp works, whenever you have it selected, it wants to know, do you only want to sample from a current layer, current and below, or all layers? For us, I want to make sure that we're selected on all layers. And if I have my patch layer selected here, and I use my Alt key to make a selection of something back here, like this, and now I can click and drag, and it'll clone stamp that part. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to make a selection. I'm going to clone stamp that part out. Same thing over here. Just want to make it kind of believable. I'm going to sample maybe an area here so that I can kind of have that transition into the sky nicely. Okay, so I want to show you what I've done here. If I hide and unhide this, you can see what I've done with this old patch layer. If I hide my horse layer, you can see this is just whatever I made. That's existing on top of the horse. I could even click my move tool and click and drag this little thing around. It's not something that you do all the time, but it could be kind of useful in some situations. I kind of like doing something like this sometimes because it's non-destructive, and if I needed to change something, I could always go back and do it. Okay, so I'm going to put that back in a position. I'm going to bring the gorilla head back in. And see, I think we might be ready to start kind of transitioning this a little better. So I'm going to make sure that I'm clicked on my mask part, or my gorilla layer, and I want to try to fade this a little bit more. This is something that I'm going to bring up my sides of this, maybe bring down my hardness. And here's something that we haven't used yet, but it's the opacity part of your paintbrush. So by default, it's always at 100, but we can change this to whatever we want. The lower it is, the smaller increments it makes. Usually I like to be on like maybe 15% or so, and I'll show you kind of what happens whenever you use it. So I'm going to click, and it makes a very kind of gradual change here. I'm just kind of clicking once at a time. I think I'm going to bring down my opacity even more. That way it's an even more gradual change. I swap back to white so I can kind of bring this back because I can see part of that bridle and I want to hide it. Okay, so that's a little better. I'm going to hide and unhide this because I see this weird edge to that. I want to make sure that I get rid of it, so I'm going to bring up my opacity and I'm going to click and drag on that edge. So it's just a little bit nicer. Might even go in here and bring up my hardness. Bring up my opacity, and then take care of that. Something that keeps bothering me back here is that kind of darkness. I'm going to go back to my patch layer, get my clone stamp, sample maybe this layer, that part. Okay, that's making me feel a little bit better. Okay. I'm going to go back to my gorilla mask, and I'm going to select my paintbrush again, and then I'm going to kind of fix up that part. Now it feels like it's flowing into it pretty well. I think so far the thing that looks the weirdest is my background, but we'll play around with that maybe later. For now, I'm just worried about the way that these two go together. So I'm going to click on my gorilla layer again. I'm going to take my move tool, and I'm just going to make sure that this is in a good spot. If I have my move tool selected, if I use my arrow keys, I can make small adjustments to this, and that's kind of, this is getting it more where I want it, I think. Because now I'm able to hide some of that bridle, and this is kind of flowing into it. Okay, couple more things. These are, we're going to introduce some adjustment layers, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to try to make this feel like it's part, like in the same light. If you look at this gorilla, it's got this kind of bluish tint to it, and then this has got this warmer tint to it from the sun. So first of all, I'm going to make some adjustment layers. Adjustment layers are nice because they are non-destructive, and you can hide them, turn them on and off. And in general, they're just really good to kind of see the changes that you could make to your piece without destroying it. So in order to make an adjustment layer, you go to your layers panel. There's this black and white circle or black and white cookie. Click on that, and then you have a plethora of options to choose from. Some of the main ones that we use are levels, color balance, hue and saturation, black and white even, channel mixers, curves. I want to make two different layer adjustment layers. The first one is a levels adjustment layer. So I'm going to click on this. And the way an adjustment layer works is you can adjust it with your properties panel. If you don't know where your properties panel is, you can go to window and then should be able to click it and it'll pop up. And the adjustment layer, it literally makes a new layer. The way that these work are whatever you do to your adjustment layer, it's going to affect everything that's beneath it. So for instance, if I'm changing the levels of this, the levels changes the lights and the darks, the midtones. So you can see how this is affecting everything. Now if I take this levels layer and I drop it beneath the gorilla, it will affect everything beneath the gorilla, and it will leave this part alone. I think I might actually drag it beneath the gorilla so things can get a little bit darker and it can match it a little bit better. Okay, next thing I want to do is make a new adjustment layer that is a color balance one. So I'm going to hit the black and white cookie again. I'm going to go to color balance. Makes a new adjustment layer. Color balance is a really great thing to use in order to get your colors to match up together. you can take your slider from red to cyan, magenta to green, yellow to blue, and you're working within midtones, shadows, and highlights. The way you change it is hitting that drop down menu and swapping between them. Each one of those will affect the picture in different ways. So for this gorilla, I kind of want to warm it up a little bit. So what I can do is take my slider here. I'm going to just add a little bit of red, maybe a little bit of yellow, and see how that's affecting the entire picture? I don't necessarily want that. So the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is a more complicated thing, but it's the single mouse click. This is called a clipping mask. A clipping mask will clip on to a particular layer and only affect that layer. So if I have an adjustment layer like this and I want it to only affect this gorilla layer, the way that I do that is make sure that that adjustment layer is directly above it. I'm going to right click on this and click on create clipping mask. And whenever I do that, you can see there's an arrow that's pointing down. That just means that that change just took effect. Now whenever I change my colors here, it only affects that gorilla. And this can be really useful. Okay. Now, general rule of thumb is you don't go too crazy with it, but you know, a little goes a long way. We're going to make just small adjustments. So there's the midtones. I'm going to go to my shadows. One thing I like to do is see what actually, how the picture is affected whenever I kind of slide it back and forth. I think it's kind of working better whenever it's maybe not even adjusted. Look better in the zero portion. This is looking a little better, adding more yellow to it. You can see already, like, we're kind of toning down that blue. I'm going to click on my highlights. Maybe add a little bit more warmth to it, maybe a little bit more yellow. Okay, so we've adjusted the colors on the gorilla, but it's still not matching perfectly with that horse. Another general rule of thumb whenever you're working with color balance or you're trying to make two images go together, best thing to do is to affect one a little bit and affect the other one a little bit, so it's more of a compromise between the two colors. It's much easier than making this perfectly match this over here. So what I'm going to do is highlight my horse layer. I'm going to go to a new adjustment layer by clicking on the black and white cookie and going up to color balance. And once this is selected, I want to make a clipping mask because, again, if I change things on here, it's going to affect my background. I don't necessarily, well, I guess that's all that's left is actually the background, but I'll make a clipping mask for this anyway. So I'm going to right click on it and then create clipping mask. Now I'm going to affect the horse layer slightly. Now with this, I'm going to try to add a little bit more cool to it, or more cool tones, so then it matches that gorilla a little bit better. And my midtones and my shadows. And my highlights. Okay. So this is working much better. Okay, it's not looking too bad. I think some of the parts that aren't working very well are just like that background part there. Still need to get rid of this. Maybe I'll just try something with a spot healing brush, see if this kind of helps me out. I'm going to click on my patch layer, and now with my healing brush I can have this sample all layers as well. I'll have to click that little check mark, and now I'm able to sample all the layers that are on there. That was nice and painless. You know what? The healing brush is doing a pretty good job for us. Oops, not there. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. One kind of nice trick that people have been doing for hundreds of years is like this mirror trick where you flip your image. This is something that I highly recommend that you do. One way that you can do this is going to image rotation, and flip horizontal. You can see that there's a hotkey on there where it says F2. That's something that I've done personally where you can make your own hotkeys. I do this so much that I have a key for it. So if I press F2, I can look at this, and gosh, it looks so different because I've been spending so much time working on it in the reverse way. Now my eyes are kind of adjusting to it in a completely kind of different orientation, and it can kind of like help the way that I'm figuring out how this image looks. One thing that I'm finding out now is like how much at a slant this is, where it's kind of at a Dutch angle. So one thing I want to do is rotate it, my whole picture, and then I might recrop it. Actually, I might just recrop it and then rotate it at the same time. I'll show you how to do that. Here's your crop tool. I'm going to click on this. Then you have these crop markers that show up. Now generally with these you just kind of bring in your sides and then you crop your picture. I'm going to undo that. Because one thing I want to do with my crop is do it a little bit fancier. If I go out on the edge here, you can see where my arrow kind of becomes a curve. If I click and drag, I can change the way that this is cropped. And one thing I'm doing is kind of trying to change the horizon line slightly. So it's more horizontal. Now it's kind of more up and down. I'm going to bring this up slightly. And then I double click to accept those changes, and this is feeling a little bit more natural where it doesn't look like it's about ready to fall over. I'm going to take my lasso tool, and I'm still on my patch layer here. I'm going to click and I'm going to see if the content aware tool will do me good. So I'm going to go to edit, fill, content aware. Yikes, that didn't do what I wanted it to. I'm going to go to my horse layer that's copied. Now I'm going to try my content aware. Maybe if I'm on the layer that has it, it might fix it up. Yeah, that looks way better. The way the content aware works is it does it on the layer that you're on. So I was on my patch layer and I was trying to sample things that were on that patch layer. So now I'm just going to kind of fix a few things up. Okay, not bad. I want to swap this back just because it kind of looks weird like that. So image rotation, flip horizontal. Okay, there is my gorilla horse, my gorse, or my horilla. I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to do my last name underscore Zach underscore, I'm just going to call this my horilla, and then save. I'm going to go to Save As again, just because I want to show you, make sure that you save as a PSD, because that'll retain all of your layers here. It will keep all of your adjustment layers, put them in the exact order that you have them, all of that. And after you save it as a PSD, I also want you to save it as a JPEG. So if you hit the drop down menu here, where it says save as type, you have a lot of different options to work from. I'm going to click on JPEG right here. Don't worry about JPEG 2000 or stereo, or just regular JPEG. And what a JPEG is, it just reduces the file size in a way where it kind of condenses your pixels and adjusts the colors slightly. But again, JPEGs are sort of the industry standard of the internet. And then I'm going to press save. And here's an important part whenever you're making a JPEG. I think by default it starts you off on a 6 quality. You always want to bump that up to the highest quality. And that is a 12. I'm going to press OK. And then that's it. That's your hybrid. I'm going to upload this to the folder. I'm going to upload the PSD so you can kind of break it down and look at it if you want to. And if you have any questions, by all means, email me and we'll get it figured out if you have any questions. The other part, Monday, I want you to do 2 of these things. So here is one of them that's complete. Now it's time to do another. Okay, I'll talk to you Monday.